In the old quarter of the city, everyone knew Pastor Elias Varde. He was the kind of man people stood up for when he entered a room. Wealthy, well-dressed, soft-spoken in public, the owner of 2 charity homes, a large prayer hall, and a reputation so polished people repeated his name like it meant safety. On Sundays, he spoke about mercy. On weekdays, he funded food drives, sat on community boards, and shook hands like a man blessing the world one person at a time. People said he was proof that God still worked through human beings. And Elias had learned to wear that praise like a second skin. He knew how to lower his voice at the right moment. He knew how long to pause before saying words like dignity, faith, and compassion. He knew how to place a hand on someone's shoulder just long enough for others to notice. There was nothing careless about him. Even his kindness had posture. By evening, he had just finished speaking at a neighborhood gathering near the market square. A small crowd still surrounded him as he stepped out onto the street, nodding at his every word. A man laughed too quickly at something he said. A woman told her daughter, "That is what a righteous man looks like." Elias heard it, and though his face remained humble, something inside him straightened with pleasure. Across the road, under a flickering street lamp, stood a woman no one introduced with respect. Her name was Mira. Most people in that part of the city did not know her story. They knew only the label attached to her. Street woman, night woman, sinner. Men who used her by darkness judged her by daylight. Women looked away. Boys stared too long. Shopkeepers tolerated her only because she stayed quiet and never caused trouble. But labels are the laziest form of blindness. Mira was in her early 30s, though hardship had added years to her face. Her shawl was faded. One sandal had been stitched at the strap by hand. In her purse were a few small notes and some coins, barely enough for a meal and a cheap room for the night. She held that purse close, not because it contained much, but because it was all that stood between her and sleeping hungry. A tea stall boy nearly dropped a tray of cloudy glasses near the curb. Mira reached out and caught it before it crashed. Slowly, she told him, "No need to rush." The boy gave her a shy look and moved on. A few steps later, she noticed an elderly woman coughing hard beside a shuttered fabric shop. Mira opened her purse, stared at the little money inside, then walked to the stall and bought a bottle of water anyway. "Take small sips," she said, placing it in the woman's hand. No one applauded that. No one called her holy. The city was not built to notice quiet mercy. The market air smelled of dust, frying oil, and overripe fruit. Rickshaws rattled over broken pavement. Shop lights flickered one by one as the evening shifted from trade to survival. Elias stood in the center of admiration. Mira stood at the edge of judgment. One carried public honor, the other carried private exhaustion. And still, if someone had looked deeper, they would have seen something strange. The respected man was hungry to be seen. The condemned woman was still capable of giving. Elias adjusted his cuff and prepared to leave. Then his eyes moved across the street and landed on Mira. He slowed, not because he felt compassion, because men like Elias could sense a social opportunity the way gamblers sense weakness at a table. The small group around him followed his gaze. A few faces changed at once: disapproval, discomfort, moral excitement. Mira felt it before a word was spoken. She knew that look. She had lived under it for years. It was the look that turned a human being into a lesson for someone else's performance. She lowered her eyes, not in guilt, but in recognition. This was not the first righteous man who needed someone beneath him to feel taller. The street seemed to hold its breath. One soul wrapped in reputation, one soul wrapped in disgrace, and somewhere beyond both, karma was already listening. Elias did not cross the street right away. He paused first. That was his habit when he wanted attention. He let silence gather before he spoke. Like a man arranging a stage no one else could see. The people around him followed his gaze and noticed Mira standing under the weak street lamp, her shawl pulled close, her face calm in the way only wounded people learn to be. A murmur passed through the group. Some looked uncomfortable, some looked curious, a few looked almost eager. Elias stepped off the curb with slow, measured certainty. His polished shoes touched the broken road, as if even the dust should feel honored. 2 men from the gathering came with him. Others stayed back, but not far. No one wanted to miss what might happen next. Mira saw him coming and felt the old heaviness settle in her chest. Not fear exactly, something more familiar than fear. The exhaustion of knowing another stranger was about to use her existence to prove something about himself. He stopped a few feet away. For a moment he said nothing. He looked at her the way some people look at stained cloth. Something visible, embarrassing, useful only as a warning. Then he sighed, soft enough to sound holy. "My daughter," he said, in the gentle voice he used when he wanted witnesses. Mira kept her eyes on him but did not answer. Elias folded his hands in front of him. "Do you feel no shame, standing here like this, in front of families, in front of children?" The words were calm. That made them sharper. A few people nearby turned fully now. A fruit seller stopped tying his crates. A woman with a shopping bag slowed her steps. The tea stall boy peeked from behind a metal counter. The street, which had ignored Mira all evening, suddenly found use for her. Mira swallowed once. "I'm not bothering anyone." Elias gave a sad smile, the kind that pretended disappointment while enjoying it. That is how sin speaks now, quietly, as if it deserves respect. One of the men behind him nodded too fast. Another lowered his eyes, but stayed. Mira felt heat rise to her face. "I'm just standing here." "No," Elias said, a little louder this time. "You are not just standing. You are inviting corruption. You are poisoning the moral air of this street." He turned slightly, just enough to include the small crowd without appearing theatrical. He was speaking to her, but performing for them. That was the true act. Not correction, not concern. Display. Mira looked at the ground for a second. The pavement was cracked near her sandal. She fixed her eyes there, as if the right piece of silence might carry her through this faster. Elias saw that and mistook it for surrender. He stepped closer. "There is still time to leave this life. There is still time to repent." The word landed like an insult dressed as mercy. Mira lifted her head. Her voice, when it came, was low and tired. "You don't know my life." Something changed in Elias's face then. Very small, very quick. The softness hardened at the edges. Men like him could tolerate weakness. They could even appear compassionate toward it. But resistance, even quiet resistance, offended them. "I know enough," he said. "The path you walk dishonors God." A few people murmured approval. That was the moment he wanted. Not truth, agreement. Mira's fingers tightened around her purse. Inside it was the money she had not spent on herself. The money that now felt strangely heavy, like a private witness to something this crowd would never understand. She could have argued. She could have told them about the father who drank away rent money, the husband who left debt in her name, the months she cleaned houses until her body gave out, the landlord who stopped accepting explanations and only wanted payment. She could have told them how hunger makes philosophers disappear, how survival humiliates people long before society does. But streets are full of people who ask for truth only so they can reject it. So she said nothing. That silence should have warned him. Instead, Elias took it as permission to go further. He raised his voice just enough for the far edge of the crowd. "People like you," he said, "destroy homes, tempt weak men, and then stand in public as if decency owes you space." The words hit harder than shouting would have. Someone in the back gave a quiet, "That's right." Mira's throat tightened, her eyes burned, but she refused to let tears fall there. Not in front of him, not in front of those faces feeding on borrowed righteousness. Then Elias reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded note. For 1 second, Mira thought he might be offering help. Instead, he held it up where others could see. "If you truly want to change," he said, "take this and go somewhere no decent family has to see you." A few people shifted awkwardly. Even they felt the cruelty in it now. But cruelty spoken in a pious tone often escapes judgment for a while. Mira looked at the money, then at him. "No," she said. The answer was simple. No trembling, no speech, just refusal. And that refusal unsettled him more than anger would have. His hand stayed in the air a moment too long before he slowly lowered it. The mask nearly slipped. Not fully, just enough. For the first time, the crowd could see something beneath the holy posture. Not sorrow for her, not moral courage, but injury. His pride had reached out expecting obedience and found a boundary instead. Mira took one small step back. "I may be beneath your respect," she said quietly, "but I'm not beneath God's sight." That line did not sound rehearsed. That is why it struck. The street went still. Elias stared at her, and for one brief second, he had no words. Not because she had insulted him, because she had spoken from a place he did not own. Then he recovered himself, smoothed his cuff, and stepped away as if the exchange had ended on his terms. "Pray for her," he told the crowd, but what he meant was, remember who stood above whom. He turned and walked back toward the market lights, surrounded again by the people who preferred appearances to discomfort. Yet the air had changed. Something in the street no longer belonged to him. Mira remained under the lamppost, still holding her purse, still holding herself together by force. Her face was calm, but inside, the wound had opened. And somewhere beyond the eyes of the crowd, beyond the applause of false virtue, the law had already taken note. Because karma does not move at the moment of insult, it moves at the moment intention becomes clear. Mira did not move until the street had forgotten her again. That was the worst part of humiliation, not always the words, but the speed with which life resumed around them. The fruit seller went back to packing crates. The tea stall hissed. Rickshaws passed. People returned to their errands as if nothing sacred had been damaged. She stood beneath the lamppost with her purse pressed against her ribs and felt the aftershock in silence. Not rage, not even surprise, just that old bitter ache of being judged by people whose own darkness had better tailoring. She turned and walked toward the narrower part of the market road, where the lights thinned and the noise broke into patches. Her steps were steady, but slower now. At the end of the lane, she stopped near a shuttered pharmacy and sat on a low cement ledge. Only then did her face change. Her jaw loosened, her shoulders dropped. She looked down at her hands as if they belonged to someone she had been carrying too long. She did not cry loudly, no dramatic collapse, just one tear first, then another, falling in the quiet way grief falls when it is already old. She wiped her face almost immediately. Survival had taught her not to stay broken for long. Across the city, Elias was finishing the evening exactly as he liked to finish such nights, with admiration still around him. He had been invited to tea by one of the businessmen from the gathering. They praised his courage, said too few men still spoke the truth in public. One even laughed and called him a defender of morality. Elias accepted it all with lowered eyes and careful modesty. But inside, he was glowing, not with peace, with the private thrill of someone whose cruelty had been mistaken for righteousness. By the time he left, it was late. The market roads had emptied into longer shadows. His driver had gone to fetch the car from the far corner where it was parked, and Elias, impatient, chose to cut through a side alley behind the pharmacy row. The alley smelled of damp concrete, rotting paper, and stale smoke. A stray dog lifted its head from a pile of sacks and watched him pass. His shoes clicked against the uneven ground. The sound echoed strangely in the narrow dark. Then he stopped. His hand moved to his chest. At first it felt like pressure, annoying, sharp. He breathed in once, expecting it to pass. It did not. The pressure became pain, fast, heavy, a crushing weight that seemed to press from inside his ribs outward. He grabbed the wall. Air suddenly felt too thin. His mouth opened, but the alley swallowed the sound. The second wave hit harder. His knees buckled, and he dropped awkwardly to the ground, one shoulder striking the wall, before he slid down onto the dirty pavement. For the first time that night, no one was watching, no admirers, no witnesses, no borrowed holiness, just a man in expensive clothes choking on his own helplessness. He tried to call out, but it came as a broken gasp. Sweat gathered across his forehead. His fingers trembled against his chest. The pain spread into his arm, then his jaw. The alley spun. Panic arrived all at once, naked and humiliating. People passed the mouth of the alley without entering. A couple glanced in, saw a man crumpled on the ground, and kept walking. A delivery boy slowed, then hurried on. In cities like that, distress was common enough to become background. Elias, who had spent years being seen, was now invisible where it mattered most. A few streets away, Mira rose from the cement ledge and started walking again. Her face composed, her body tired, her purse lighter than it should have been. She could have gone the longer road back toward the main crossing. Instead, Almost without thinking, she took the side lane near the pharmacy, and there, in the half-dark of the alley, she saw a figure on the ground. At first, he was just a body in clean clothes. Then she stepped closer and recognized him. Mira stopped where she was. For one hard second, she simply looked at him. Pastor Elias Varde lay twisted against the alley wall, one hand clutched to his chest, his breathing broken into short, desperate pulls. The same mouth that had shamed her in front of strangers was now open in panic. His polished hair was damp with sweat. His face had lost all color. The expensive coat, the clean collar, the posture, the public voice, none of it mattered here. He looked smaller on the ground, more ordinary, more mortal. His eyes found hers, and something flashed through them. Recognition first, then fear, then a humiliation deeper than pain. He knew exactly who was standing over him. For a moment, Mira did nothing, not out of cruelty, out of truth. Because this was the real test, not whether she had suffered, but what suffering had made of her. A part of her wanted to walk away, not dramatically, not with revenge in her heart, just with the cold logic pain sometimes produces. Let the street judge him now. Let the holy man learn what it feels like when people keep moving. Let the universe answer in silence. And honestly, for one breath, that silence tempted her. She looked at his hand trembling against his chest. She heard the ragged scrape in his breathing. She remembered the crowd, the words, the money raised in front of her, like she was something dirty that needed to be pushed out of sight. Her jaw tightened. "Please," Elias whispered. It barely sounded like him. That shook something loose inside her. Not pity exactly. Recognition. This was a man stripped of performance. A man with no audience left. No titles. No followers. No polished phrases. Just fear, pain, and the ugly equality of a failing body. Mira closed her eyes for half a second. When she opened them again, the choice had already been made. She crouched beside him. "Can you hear me?" He gave the smallest nod. "Don't try to stand." She looked toward the alley mouth. No one was coming. She stepped out and waved at two passing men, asking for help. One shook his head before she even finished. The other glanced down the alley, muttered something about trouble, and walked faster. Mira felt anger rise, but there was no time for anger. She checked Elias's pockets quickly, searching for a phone, medicine, anything. No phone, no tablets, just a wallet, thick with cards and folded bills. She pulled it free, opened it, and froze, empty. Not of cards, of cash. Then she remembered hearing one of the businessmen insist on paying for everything at tea. Elias probably had not expected to need money tonight. His breathing turned shallower. Mira stood up fast and looked toward the shuttered pharmacy at the alley corner. One side window was still open, the owner counting stock before closing. She ran there and called out what was happening. The pharmacist frowned. "He needs a hospital." "I know. Give me something for the chest pain first. Anything, until I can get help." He hesitated. "You have money?" Mira opened her purse. A few notes, some coins, that was all. The room for the night, tomorrow's food, maybe both. She looked down at it for 1 second, then placed everything on the counter. "Take it." The pharmacist counted quickly, pushed 2 tablets across, and handed her a small strip for immediate use with water. "Under the tongue, then get him transported now." Mira grabbed them and ran back. Elias was worse. His head had dropped forward. His breath came in thin, panicked bursts. She knelt, lifted his shoulder carefully, and placed the tablet where the pharmacist had told her. Then she uncapped the bottle of water she had been saving for herself and touched it to his mouth. "Slowly," she said, the same word she had used with the tea boy. Slowly, he obeyed, not because he respected her, not yet, because pain had done what pride never could. It had made him receive from the hands he had condemned. A rickshaw rolled past the alley entrance. Mira rushed out, flagged it down, and pleaded with the driver. He took one look and refused, said he did not want a man dying in his vehicle. She stepped closer and held out Elias's watch. The driver stared. It was worth far more than the ride. "Take us," she said. He hesitated, then nodded. Together, she and the driver lifted Elias into the back. He groaned once, his head falling against the worn seat. Mira climbed in beside him, one hand steadying his shoulder as the rickshaw jolted toward the clinic. The city lights passed in broken streaks. Elias kept his eyes half open, dazed, weak, confused. Once, he turned his face slightly toward her, as if trying to understand what kind of world this was. One where the person he had tried to reduce was now the only thing standing between him and death. Mira did not speak. There are moments when words become too small for what is being revealed. By the time they reached the clinic gate, her purse was empty, completely empty. But he was alive, and sometimes that is where karma becomes unbearable. Not when it punishes, but when it forces a man to survive by the grace of the person he believed was beneath him. Pastor Elias woke to the smell of antiseptic and ironed sheets. For a few seconds, he did not know where he was. The ceiling above him was plain. The room was small. A fan turned with a soft clicking sound overhead. His chest still ached, but the crushing pain was gone. In its place was a deeper discomfort. The strange weakness that comes after the body has been forced to confess it is not in control. He tried to sit up. A sharp pull ran through his arm where the needle had been taped. The doctor, standing at the foot of the bed, looked up from the chart. "Easy. You were fortunate." Elias swallowed. His mouth was dry. "Who brought me here?" The doctor glanced at him for a moment, then said, "The woman who found you in the alley." Elias frowned faintly, still caught between sleep and memory. Then it returned. The alley, the pain, the face above him. Mira. His fingers tightened around the thin hospital blanket. "She paid for your first medicine," the doctor added, "and gave up what little she had to get you here quickly. Another 20 minutes, and this might have ended differently." The room went still. Elias looked toward the doorway, as if she might still be there. But she wasn't. Of course she wasn't. People like Mira were not invited to remain where gratitude would become inconvenient. "What time is it?" he asked. "Nearly morning." The doctor closed the chart. "You should rest." But rest was impossible now. For the first time in many years, Elias had no sermon between himself and the truth. He lay back slowly and stared at the ceiling fan turning overhead. He thought of the street lamp, her silence, the note he had held out like an act of mercy when it had really been contempt in clean clothing. He remembered the crowd watching him. He remembered how satisfied he had felt. And then he remembered her voice in the alley. Calm, steady, human. The same person he had tried to reduce to a warning had become his shelter. That was the part he could not escape. Not that she had saved him, but that she had done it without needing him to deserve it. By mid-morning, Elias asked to be taken home. His driver arrived pale and shaken. Messages had already spread through the community. Pastor Elias had suffered a heart attack, but was recovering by God's grace. By God's grace. The phrase followed him like an accusation. When the car passed the old market road, Elias turned his head toward the street lamp, where Mira had been standing the night before. In daylight, the place looked ordinary, too ordinary for the violence that had happened there. A tea stall, a torn poster on the wall, a drain running along the curb. Nothing in the scene announced revelation. That is how karma often works. It does not always descend in thunder. Sometimes it waits in small places until a human soul exposes itself. A few days later, Elias stood again before a crowd, not as strong, not as polished. His voice was softer now, but not with performance. Something in him had been cut open, and he knew it. The people expected a testimony about survival, perhaps a dramatic proclamation about divine rescue. Instead, he stood in silence longer than usual. Then he said, "There are people we condemn because it protects the image we have of ourselves." The room shifted. Elias looked down at his hands before continuing. "I believed appearance was holiness. I believed public virtue was proof of a clean heart. I was wrong." No one moved. He did not speak Mira's full story. That was not his story to use, but he told them enough. He told them that the person who saved his life was someone he had publicly shamed only hours earlier. He told them that mercy had come to him through the very hands he had judged unworthy. And he told them something harder than confession. "The universe," he said quietly, "does not kneel before titles. It answers truth. It answers intention. It answers the heart beneath the action." There were no amens after that, only silence, the useful kind. The kind that makes people look inward instead of outward. That evening, after the hall had emptied, Elias left an envelope with money, no note, no signature, at the tea stall near the market, asking only that it reach Mira if she returned. It was more than repayment. He knew money could not settle this debt. Some debts remain where they belong, in the soul. Mira did return to that road, though not the very next night. When the tea seller handed her the envelope and awkwardly explained, she looked at it for a long moment. Then she took out only a small portion, just enough to cover what she had lost that night, and pushed the rest back. "Give the rest to someone who needs medicine," she said. The tea seller stared at her. "Are you sure?" Mira gave a tired little smile. "I already know what money can and cannot clean." Then she walked back toward the fading light, her shawl wrapped close, her steps unhurried, her face carrying that same quiet no crowd had ever managed to understand. And somewhere beyond the judgments of men, balance was restored. Not because a priest was punished, not because a woman was praised, but because karma had revealed what had been true all along. One soul wore holiness, the other carried it.